Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to take a look at another FPV flying model, and this one is relatively small as well. Now this is the Nano Talon. We looked at the Mini Talon a little while ago. I put a flight controller in the Mini Talon. In fact, I think it was the Pixhawk. So if you want to see an awful lot more of its bigger brother, then go and have a look at that review, and also go and watch the Pixhawk series. But this is a much more compact model that's designed to be quite modular. So just like the Swallow 670 that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, the wings come off, the tail comes off, and it means that if you want to, it'll be a piece of cake to transport around. But whereas with the Swallow 670 that we looked at, it was all a bit of a mess, this model actually works really well. Now I need to give a shout out to Tech Distribution, which is where these came from. I've known the owner of Tech Distribution for a couple of years, a lovely guy called Key. He was thinking of getting these models in to supply to all of the model shops that he sells to in Europe. He's normally an FPV and a quadcopter distributor, but he was thinking of some fixed wings. So we had got a couple of models in, opened them up, had a play with them, and then he asked me if I would like them, because he can't resell them because they've all been opened. So a big thank you to Keith, because without him I wouldn't have these two models. The two I'm talking about are not only this model here, but also the Zedo HD Dart. Now the Dart is a very similar kind of idea to this one. Again, the wings and everything pop off. It also includes the same kind of stabilizer system that's in here too. So if you want me to go through and show the Zedo HD Dart in another video, pop a comment down below and I'll do a setup for that one too. So in this video, we'll go through the specs, I'll show you how it comes in the box, give you some tips about building this little fella, and then show you how it flies. So this plane is made of EPP foam, has a V-tail at the back. It's about 860 millimeters wide, about 570 millimeters long, so it's actually a lot smaller than it looks in this video. Doesn't have flaps, has ailerons out on the stubby little wings, and then of course with the V-tail that's doing the rudder and elevator too. The motor is a 2204 1870 kV unit, branded as Zedo HD, and that's spinning a 6x3 prop, whereas some of the other Talons you can get into problems where the prop can strike the ground because it's got like a little bit of plastic essentially at the bottom. This one is a much nicer design and it's made to be quite rugged. All of the servos are pre-installed, all the linkages are set up, because the really cool thing about this model that you'll see in a moment is all of the servos are actually held inside the body, and there are linkages that run out into the arms. So the way that the wings and the tail is built, they're all built with really beautiful little hinges that help translate that servo movement out to the control surface movement. And it's done in a way where you can take the wings and the tail off for transport too. So let's talk a little bit about how this thing comes in the box. It is a much smaller box than you expect. When the package arrived here, I wasn't sure what it was going to be, and when I opened it, it's a surprise to see it was actually a fixed wing model. So if I open the box, the first thing you see are the wings. Again, they are very nicely done. Lots of reinforcement inside, black underneath to help for orientation, very similar shape to the other Talon wings. Great hinges, really smooth movement, and that is because the way it works is the actual control surface is moved from this little piece at the end. Then we've got a reinforcing rod, and we've also got a little clip that clips it into the main body itself. Nice that they've also got the centre of gravity under the wing. I'll talk about where the CG needs to be when we get to the flying bit. Then we have the two rear tail feathers. This is for the V-tail. Again, really nice little setup for the hinges, and they go together into the body itself, and the magnets here, which are actually nice and strong, keep it in one piece inside the body. But again, these have no servos in them at all. It's all hidden away inside the main event. So here's the main body. I do like the black and white foam and the way they've done it. It looks very striking. So we have our motor here at the back that's installed. Again, that's that 2204 1870 kV unit, Zedo HD branded. We have the space at the back for the V-tail, and hopefully in there you can actually see the control rods coming up from the servos that we'll look at in a second to control the V-tail control surfaces. The front comes off with this little clip, and then there is absolutely tons and tons of room inside. And that little clip does a great job of holding everything in place. Inside the body we have the little stand if you want to put some kind of action camera on the nose of the model. I'm flying it without a little action camera just because with the big battery that I'm using here, the centre of gravity is spot on. And then this middle canopy pops off. You can only remove it once you have the nose cover off, and in here is all the really good stuff. So hopefully you can see that we have a stabilizer. You can connect it allegedly via PPM. We have a single servo that controls the two linkages that go out into the wings for the aileron, which is a really, really cute design. And then we have the two servos here side by side that are for running the V-tail, and those are the ones that have the push rods on that go to those little control surfaces at the back. Loads and loads of room in here for our receiver. Now inside the plane we have the prop. That's that 6x3 prop. Interestingly, it's not a standard prop, it's threaded on its own, so I'm no doubt going to end up having to get a spare of those. Don't know if it's actually an insert rather than a completely custom prop, but I'll see when I break it. And then putting it back together is pretty straightforward. You snap the middle piece on, and the front canopy has two little clips at the front that you pop in place, and then push the back of the front canopy down, twist that screw, and you're all done. Installing the wings is really straightforward. You just have to locate the spar in the front piece and make sure that the rod for the control surface is going to clip in too. Just take your time. It needs to just be under this little lip under the top. There'll be a nice solid thunk, and then it's pretty in there. Actually, there is a little bit of movement, and if I have a couple of crashes with this, I expect this might get a little bit looser. If it did, I might put some tape on it, but at the moment I don't think I'm going to need to. The rear tail feathers, the V-tail, is exactly the same, so just push it into the body. Make sure that you are aligning the control surface rod with the little hole it's got to go in, and it will just plunk home. And there you can see the magnet inside waiting to clip onto the other side. So let me just pop that one on as well. Again, just being very careful just to make sure those clip in. And there's the tail in place. Again, nice and sturdy, surprisingly sturdy actually, considering that there's no glue or anything holding it in. And then it's the final wing. So physically putting the model together is really, really straightforward, and this is definitely a model that you could break down and build at the field, potentially put in a backpack if you were going up a mountain, do some slope soaring or flying off the top of a ridge or something like that. I am impressed at how well it all has fitted together. Underneath there isn't any protection at the front for skid landings. There's a hole at the front for an air intake, a nice position for the camera looking out the front, and there's also a big black hatch here. We take that off. That again is held on by magnets, and loads of room in here. So if you need space for a flight controller, if you want to put your FPV gear somewhere where you can get to it, despite its small size, they've really thought about this to make sure that you can absolutely get to everything. Couple of comments on the building of this thing and how it all wires together. The manual is very basic indeed. It's only a two-sided bit of paper. On one side it shows you how to stick it together, which is really just what you've watched in the video, and the other side is talking about the ZOHD stabilizer and how you put it together. Unfortunately, there's nowhere near enough information on that little bit of paper, so let me talk about what I've found out. In the manual for the ZOHD stabilizer, it talks about a PPM input. Don't try PPM. I've struggled with that for a very long time trying to make it work. I know lots of other pilots have struggled as well. I think the PPM implementation on the ZOHD stabilizer is terrible. And that's a real shame, because what I wanted to do was use one of the really small FrSky receivers that had a PPM output so that I could keep the weight down of the model. In the end, I stuck an X8R in here and connected it up just as per the manual. The mode switch, let me just talk a little bit about that. There's 2 or 3 different flight modes here on this stabilizer. It's not really very well explained. There's a 3-axis stabilizing mode for advanced user, and there's also a 6-axis auto stability takeoff mode for beginner. Now if the red light's on, it means you've got the 3-axis stabilizing mode, and if you've got the blue indicator on, it means you've got the 6-axis auto stability takeoff mode for beginners on. Now I found that with the mode switch in a low position, it appears to be launch mode. Channel value being a high position, i.e. 2000 microseconds, it appears to be the stabilize. And what those two modes give you is a very capable plane that's also actually quite good for beginners as well as more accomplished FPV pilots. So I've got my switch on the radio set up for low position is launch mode, middle position is manual mode, it just seems to turn the stabilizer off. High position seems to be the stabilize mode, which is for more advanced pilots. The nice thing about launch mode is as you increase the throttle, the rear tail feathers pop up to pull the nose of the model up as well, which is a nice idea. It just means that when you increase the throttle, if you are getting into trouble, it'll pull the nose up too. So now we've covered that, let's talk about how it flies. So here's some footage from one of the very early flights with this plane. Now, as you can tell, it is a little bit cold here in the north of England, and let me just throw this thing and show you what happens. Now, this is on launch mode, which is a 6-axis auto stabilization mode, and it is a piece of cake to fly. Very good for beginners. The interesting thing with mine, though, and I'm not sure that other pilots have had the same problem, is that I had to use an awful lot of elevator to keep the nose up because it wanted to keep sinking down to the ground. So I had the stick kind of 2/3 down to the bottom to give it lots of up elevator to keep it flying. Now, there were a couple of ways I could have potentially sorted that out. I did do the recalibration of the stabilization system. That didn't make any difference. So I could have either introduced that correction into the rear surfaces automatically. That would have reduced a lot of drag. And the other option, which is the one I actually went for, was move the battery an awful lot further back in the canopy to sort out the center of gravity. So the center of gravity needs to be about 10-12 millimeters behind where the center of gravity is actually marked on the wings on my particular plane for it to not need that amount of up correction. I do love the way this thing flies. It's very, very docile compared with the mini Talon and the full-size Talon. The Nano Talon loves to fly at all kinds of speeds. It'll quite happily poodle around at 30-40% throttle, and it is very, very efficient when it does so. I do like how much space there is inside. There is loads and loads of room. Considering this is such a small model, you have loads and loads of space for your receiver. I even went to the trouble of upgrading the ESC, more about that in a minute, and it was good that there was that much space inside, because for me I managed to push that battery far enough back into the body of the plane, almost off the back of the little mount for it underneath that front part of the canopy, and that seemed to be an awful lot happier too. The way it breaks down and goes together seems to work very well. Other pilots have reported that some of the wings don't snap together, but on mine they have stayed together brilliantly. I've had a couple of tough landings, particularly in this field that we were just looking at full of snow, and on one of them it caught a wingtip and flipped the model around, and the wing just came out of its socket and snapped straight back on. So not only is it easy to transport, but those kind of little knocks that would normally damage the foam just kind of pull the wing out of position and you just snap it back in place. This thing flies really, really well considering its smaller size. These things tend to be quite twitchy, but the stabilizer does a really good job. In the launch beginner mode, it always wants to be flying nice and level and just poodling around in the sky. So if you're a beginner and you're looking for a plane, then this potentially is one that's worth trying out. If you just go into the normal 3-axis stabilization, it becomes an awful lot more lively. In fact, the second half of this flying video is where I'm in that mode, and that feels more like a proper Talon to me. Even with the stabilization turned on, I'm getting lots of authority, and I wouldn't turn the throws too far down when you're in stabilization mode. I had a 50, 75 and 100% throws on all my control surfaces, and you know what, I didn't really need them. Even though the ailerons are huge on this model in comparison with the wing, I found that with the stabilization on, it was still very well behaved even if you're using very high rates. The inbuilt stabilizer works really well, but obviously isn't perfect because I had to play with that center of gravity. So if the plane is reasonably well set up, the stabilizer will do a good job. I do wish the manual was a little bit more verbose about how you set it up, but more about that in a moment. The FPV mounts are really good. The camera in the nose in particular tends to just act like a big snow shovel when you land in these snowy fields, and that little opening at the bottom, that little air intake, is a nightmare. The amount of snow that has got inside this plane when I've been flying and landing in snow-covered fields is immense. So I actually cover that front little air scoop with a little bit of tape if I'm going to be flying in this kind of weather. Otherwise you'll spend a couple of hours with it nose down dripping onto a piece of kitchen paper. And touch wood, so far I haven't damaged the prop either. The tail on this thing is nice and long, it's reinforced with plastic, so it provides a really good support for the rear part of the plane, and it also means that you don't damage the prop too. Couple of things to be aware of though. First of all, there aren't any spare props in the kit. It's an auto tightening prop, which is a nice idea. Having normal props with a prop nut I think would have been better, or even putting an extra prop in the box would have been a nice touch, because occasionally accidents happen. I wouldn't launch this by flicking it from a wingtip. It's easy to launch it as we've done in the video. Just hold it from the belly and give it a good throw, and if the centre of gravity is set up and you've got the stabiliser auto launch mode turned on, this thing will just climb for the sky. I did replace the ESC and BEC in my model. The one that comes by default is really small, as we saw at the beginning of the video. It looks like it's been designed for a multi-rotor. And I didn't like the fact it was a 1 amp BEC, because it appears that this thing has digital servos, the way they chatter, and 1 amp isn't going to get you very far, particularly if all those servos are working very hard. You're also running a receiver and the flight controller and other things as well. So I didn't risk the model at all. I swapped out the 30 amp ESC with a 1 amp BEC for a Hobby King unit that's much larger, and actually in flight it's only pulling 4-5 amps just pootling around, so that's well below the level here. But I was more interested in the battery eliminator circuit. This one has, I think, is a 3 amp installed, so that's plenty of power for all the electronics, and even if some of the servos are working a little bit harder in flight, then it's not going to pull the voltage down and cause a problem with the flight stabilizer or my receiver. The PPM mode on the flight stabilization I just couldn't get to work. Other pilots I think might have, but I was looking around trying to figure out what was going on. I originally tried it with an XSR, which had been a much neater solution than a great whopping X8R inside here, but no matter what I did, I just couldn't get it to work, and in the end gave up, stuck an X8R in it, and it has been flying flawlessly ever since. So if you do know the trick to get the PPM working on this, I would be fascinated to know. Pop it in the comments below, and then all Talon pilots can find it. You will get a little bit of wobble on the video. It is a small model. These are reasonably stubby wings. The stabilizer, the calibration, and the PID settings on it aren't ideal. So if you're expecting it to be super smooth FPV video, then you won't get that. But it will make the model look and behave like a plane with a wingspan of 1.5 meters rather than the little dinky thing it actually is. Last couple of points, I did a little work on mine to line up the control surfaces. Everything wasn't at 90 degrees, and when the control surfaces were in the middle position in manual mode, I've had the ailerons were a little bit out, and also the control surfaces on the tail were a little bit out as well. I went through and kind of reset those manually in manual mode using the mechanical linkages to get them pretty close. And if you did want to fly this thing in manual mode, which I wouldn't recommend because it is very twitchy indeed, then what I would do is fly it in manual mode, trim the plane, land it, and then remove the trims from the radio and put those corrections into the control surfaces, again using the manual correction. Personally, I'm not flying this in manual at all. I think the launch stabilization mode is great until you get a reasonable altitude and maybe you want to chase your mate's plane around the sky, and then flick it into full stabilization mode, and that again is a very nice responsive way to fly the model. The manual is a little bit basic. Just having two sides of a piece of paper isn't particularly good. I do hope that for future products from these guys, they put a little bit more effort into it, because having to figure some of these things out, things like, you know, which end of the channel value sets the mode to 6-axis stabilization and what value sets it for high. And again, very briefly, a low channel value on channel 5 will set you into 6-axis flight stabilization mode. That's a blue light. And a high channel value on channel 5 will set you into the 3-axis stabilization mode for normal flying, and that is a red light on the stabilizer unit. So in summary, if you are looking for a little FPV model, this is a really good plane. I am very impressed. The fact it will go at a reasonable rate, supports 3S and 4S, and it also floats. Landing this thing is not like the Mini Talon, which is kind of like bringing a brick into land. This thing will float down and land gently. Albeit if it's in a snow-covered field, it will scoop up half the field through the front air vent and end up full of snow. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video, and particularly for watching right to the very end. We try and release a video on Tuesday and Friday, and sometimes we'll release 1 or 2 extra ones in a week as well. All of the videos on the channel are organised into easy to use playlists, so do have a look in there, because if you're interested in a subject, we organise all the videos on that subject so you can find them easily all together in one place. If you like what we're doing, then please like and subscribe and tell others about the channel so they can come and join as well. We're available in all of the usual social media places, particularly in places like Instagram, Twitter, and we also share all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse.